Well, here we are for another Friday afternoon, lunchtime if you are indeed in the UK. Welcome to Insight Check, episode 3. Fridays are becoming a little bit of a Bardic Quest day, aren't they? Particularly for you wonderful patrons and YouTube members who are joining live for both this and indeed the drop. If you are on Patreon. Unfortunately, YouTube don't allow us to do live drops for members-only content, which is a real shame, because that's something that we'd certainly like to see them do, but alas. But indeed, Friday is very much Bardic Quest Day, now that we're doing Insight Check every Friday, and indeed the drop of the next episode for the early access for you wonderful patrons and YouTube members. But we have some very exciting news to share if you haven't been following us on social media or caught any of our posts, because this week we finally crossed the 1,000 public YouTube subscriber threshold. So cheers, everyone. And of course, we couldn't have done it without the support of you wonderful folks who subscribe to us on Patreon and indeed give us your hard-earned money as part of the YouTube membership program, as well as part of Bardic Quest Plus in its entirety. So a huge thank you to you guys for that support. It's been hard to get a long road, 3 years before, in fact, past 3 years before we surpassed the 1,000 mark. But we are now, I think, as far as the numbers are concerned, within the top, I think it's like 8% of YouTube channels in terms of subscriber numbers. Only 1 in 12 YouTube channels are 1,000 subscribers or more. So I'm feeling very, very chuffed and very pleased. But ultimately, I suppose, why is the 1,000 subscriber count so important, and what kind of impact is that going to have on the wider show and the wider channel? Well, for those that are not in the know, the 1,000 subscriber mark is very important for those of us who create content for YouTube, because what that unlocks for us is the ability to generate advertising revenue through the YouTube Partnership Program, which is a huge boon if you can get the viewership numbers up, of course. A huge boon because it then means that the content itself, just the content by virtue of it existing, will now start to generate income for us here at the Bardic Quest Stronghold. And what that means is that we can now start to look to hopefully reinvest some of that financial income back into the show to try and make the show even better. At the moment, the wonderful patronage that you grant us through the Bardic Quest Plus program is only really enough for us to break even on the production, post-production, marketing of the show. And there's a lot more that we would like to do if only resources would allow. So this is going to help us to unlock that. So for those that are not part of Bardic Quest Plus, be that on Patreon or YouTube, those that aren't on Bardic Quest Plus will start to see adverts on our content, which is, again, to generate revenue for us. And indeed, of course, YouTube themselves. But again, a huge, massive, massive thank you to all of you for your support of everything that we're doing here. So what's coming up on Insight Check today, aside from us celebrating our surpassing the 1,000 subscriber mark? So we're going to take a look at more of the D&D news coming out with relation to the Monster Manual, and specifically some of the information they released on the changes to Giants in the 2024/2025 Monster Manual, which I personally cannot wait to get my hands on. We're also going to be, they give us a double whammy on Tuesday, because they also released information. We're going to dive back into some Arcana Unearthed for the first time in a very long time. So we're going to head into our Arcane Library and see what they have released for us in terms of playtest material because they've given us a whopper of one, and they've given us some details on the new subclasses, which you will be able to find in the upcoming Forgotten Realms Player's Guide that is releasing later this year. So specifically, Forgotten Realms content specifically targeted at players and not just GMs. We're also then going to dip in and have a look at the Dungeon Masters Q&A. So these are the questions that you, our wonderful patrons and YouTube members, have submitted to me for our roll table, which I should probably get at the ready, actually, because I have not opened that up. So I'll get that at the ready in a moment, but we will go through some of those questions. I'll get the roll table up and running and see what questions crop up for me to address today. And then finally, we're going to round things off with some player tips, some Dungeons and Dragons player tips, which is another segment that I'd like to add into Insight Check. So if you had any recommendations or ideas for topics that you might want covered specifically as relation to players, do make sure you add those into the comments, and I'll add them to potential future topics. I know I did a suggestion box post, which I probably need to do another one of soon, but I know there were some topics in there as well. So I might have to do a poll soon and see if we can add some player tips. But so that's the rundown of the show: D&D news, Arcana Unearthed, DM Q&A, and then D&D player tips to round it off. So we've got a packed show, so I shall not ramble on anymore. Let's take a look at what's going on this week in Dungeons and Dragons. So, welcome to This Week in D&D. We're going to be taking a look at some of the new information that has come out about the giants in the Monster Manual that is due to be released in about a couple of weeks' time, or indeed early access for those that pre-ordered on D&D Beyond. I believe it's coming out next week at the time of recording. So they released earlier this week some information on giants and what they wanted to change in the 2024 Monster Manual to better reflect giants as a whole. So I took a look at the video that they released, and I've put down some kind of general basic notes to give you a rundown of some of the things that they discussed in that video. So one of the things that they said, and they've been saying this consistently throughout much of the marketing machine, shall we say, of the Monster Manual, is that they've been very much looking at a design intent for the Monster Manual to make sure that any monsters are hitting hard enough for their, as they put it, their weight class. And this is particularly true and particularly important with giants as well. And one of the things that they called out was a significant design flaw in the 2014 Giants, which I definitely agreed with and was very happy that they have noticed and indeed tried to address, which is that any giants that use their ranged attack at any point would actually drop them below their intended challenge rating. And I addressed this in one of the recent videos, that they have been looking to make sure that the challenge rating is reflective of all of the choices that a Dungeon Master might make, rather than only going by the optimal choice. And this is one thing that they have very specifically called out to say that the Giants had a design flaw with, which is that the ranged attack in terms of giants was never the optimal choice, and therefore if a Dungeon Master decided, or was forced in many ways, to use a ranged attack, that would automatically drop the giant below their intended challenge rating, and therefore not make them enough of a challenge. One of the other things that they wanted to do, which also sounded very good, and we will wait to see when the Monster Manual arrives, is that they wanted each different giant to have a little bit more of an elemental feel. There is this kind of synergy between giants and chromatic dragons, where both are representative of the various elements that exist within the world and indeed the game. And they've obviously lent into that very heavily with dragons in the past, and even more so with the new monster manual. But they wanted to make sure that particularly given that throughout history in the D&D lore, giants and dragons were constantly competing against each other, battling and fighting it out all the time for dominance. So they wanted to make sure that elemental feel that the dragons had was also representative in the giant stat blocks. And actually, that certainly has been something that I think has definitely been lacking in the previous monster manual, is that some of the giants, while some of them did certainly have those elemental features, it didn't feel like quite enough. And so they're aiming to kind of bring that to the fore. So a few changes in specific giants, which does include things other than hill giants and monsters with giant in the name. It includes things like cyclopses, ogres, and trolls, for example, which we'll come to in a moment. But cyclopses specifically, they wanted to focus in on a few ideas. And one of the main things that they have done is to focus in on a spellcasting variant of a cyclops. They were of the belief and understanding, and I agreed with them when they said this, was that they felt that the cyclops and the hill giant were just a little bit too similar in terms of their stat block, and so they wanted to differentiate them a little bit more. And one of the ways that they found to do that is if you look at the Cyclops lore and history, in folklore as well as in D&D, there is this aspect to them which kind of makes them soothsayers, diviners, whatever terminology you want to use. And so they have tried to lean into that with the Cyclops stat block, and in particular, what they've actually produced is a spellcasting variant Cyclops as a separate stat block to further lean into that. So if you really wanted to, as a dungeon master, make the Cyclops stand out from a other giant, then this spellcasting divining option is certainly one that you could do that with. They also have decided that they wanted to tweak the ogre as well. I think often the ogre the ogre's kind of a middle ground between a goblinoid and a giant, I think, in many respects, because sometimes ogres will, in fact, often ogres will team up with goblinoids and orcs and things like that. So sometimes I actually forget that it is technically a giant. But this is another one that they wanted to really try and differentiate from the hill giant. And one of the main features of the ogre is that the ogre is a very simple monster to run. It is basically go in, hit, and hit hard. And one of the things that they have said is that they wanted to preserve that simplicity, but also differentiating it from the hill giant. But they've kept the ogre's simplicity, so not really much in the way of changes there. But what they have done is chosen to lean into the elemental quality of the hill giant and differentiate that up a little bit. And they've done this by doing two things. One, a hill giant, rather than fighting with a club, essentially fights with a tree trunk. So it will whack you with a tree trunk rather than a club. And the other one is that they have decided that in the hill giant stat block, its ranged attack is to throw, as they put it, poisonous trash. Which is up to the DM to colour how they want, but I think most DMs are probably going to lean into that gruesome, gross poop flinging of hill giants, based on what they have implied, certainly. And I think that very much is the design intent for sure. So a few other things that they've called out as well with the giants was the Fomorian. And the Fomorian, I think, did get a bit of a bad deal in the 2014 Monster Manual, in so much as it was not particularly different from some other giants. Again, and this is something that keeps cropping up with giants in this, which I'm really glad they're addressing, because I've actually found giants in 2014 to be quite dull to run. I've not been particularly excited by them, but actually some of the things that they're talking about has made me very, very excited at the prospect of running some some new 2024 D&D giants. But the Fomorian kind of got a little bit of a bad deal in 2014 Monster Manual because it didn't feel particularly special. Which is a shame because they are essentially these cursed giants. So they have lent into things a little bit more. They have made the hexing ability of a Fomorian to feel more magical and, as they put it, gross than before, though they didn't go into any specifics, so we'll have to wait to see the stat block and compare. And they have also provided a table within the entry for the Fomorian for different types of physical curses for you to apply to your Fomorian. And this seems to be something that keeps cropping up a lot, is these roll tables and kind of idea generation aspects of the Monster Manual, which I am really, really looking forward to. I know in some additional books such as Volo's Guide to Monsters and Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes particularly, I really liked when they provided these things. And indeed, like in Fizzbands, and I mean, I haven't seen Bigby's what is Big B Presents The Glory of the Giants. I've not seen that, but even like in Fizzbands, you had each different dragon type had a table for adventure hooks, a table for personality traits, connections to other creatures and things like that. And I really like those as tools as a dungeon master because occasionally we do get writer's block. And so sometimes we just need something to be kind of shoved under our nose to go, oh, that's a good idea, and then that just spark an idea. So the fact that they're including things like that in the Monster Manual, I think, is a good thing, certainly. And so they've provided that as an example for the Fomorian here. And then finally, they also talked about trolls. Now, trolls are obviously a bit of an iconic D&D monster, although less so in the 5th edition era than they were in other... certainly the 4th edition days, they really lent into the troll, I feel, the 4th edition days. But one of the things that they have done is, in the Monster Manual, they had a sidebar in the 2014 one about trolls and limbs being cut off and those limbs kind of functioning on their own. And that was something that was kind of included, but not really included. It was just there as a note. But what they've done now is they've actually fully put that feature into the stat block of the troll, and also provided a stat block for these troll limbs. So the idea being that if you cut off a troll's hand, that the troll's hand will start trying to attack you and having a mind of its own. But also they've added this pretty cool feature to allow for, over time, those troll limbs to regenerate into full-size trolls, which is pretty cool as well. And kind of, I guess, gives you an idea as to the troll reproductive system. I don't know. In fact, I don't know if I want to think any more about that, but yes. So that could be a thing. So some really, really nice, interesting changes coming for the trolls and the giants in general for the 2024 Player's Handbook that I'm really, really keen to see for sure. So yes, very, very keen to see those and see that play out. I'm looking forward to getting hold of this Monster Manual for sure. They seem to be going through things with a fine-tooth comb and really having a look at what is coming and how they can change those stat blocks to make them easier to run, more fun to run. And I think one thing that the Monster Manual was certainly in need of from the 2014 one was to make the monsters feel more different from each other. And I've liked some of the designs that they've put into monsters in recent books and things. They certainly feel more dynamic. So hopefully they're going to lean into that a little bit more with the 2024 Monster Manual, which, to be perfectly honest, from everything that's coming out of Wizards of the Coast in these videos that they release, it sounds as though that's definitely the case. So really looking forward, particularly to running some giants after some of these updates that they've given us. Okay, so that wasn't the only thing that we had this week in terms of news from them. So let's head into our arcane library and look at some unearthed arcana in our rather imaginatively named show, Arcana Unearthed. Okay, so not only did we get provided information on the giants that have been added to the 2024 edition of D&D, but we are also and were also provided with some information and a new playtest packet for the Forgotten Realms players. Player's guide, I think, is what they're officially calling it for the time being. So they've given some interesting advice here, which I've only just noticed, suggesting that perhaps using a short adventure like one from Quests from the Infinite Staircase to try and test some of these out. So these are ready to play. You can use them in your games. You can find this playtest material on D&D Beyond in the sources section in Unearthed Arcana. And this is going to provide some insight into what might be coming down the pipe for us for the Forgotten Realms Player's Guide that is coming later this year. So this particular playtest packet provides us with, I believe it is 8 subclasses that are going to be coming down the line, including the College of the Moon for the Bard, the Knowledge Domain for Clerics, the Purple Dragon Knight for Fighters, the Oath of Noble Genies for the Paladin, the Winter Walker for the Ranger, the Scion of the Three, the Spellfire Sorcerer, and the Blade Singer. So I'm going to try and give a general overview here of some of these things because there is a lot here. So I'm only going to roughly run through things, but you can download this, read it in full, and give yourself an opportunity to playtest these at your table if you want to. Again, at D&D Beyond, you can find that in the sources section. So first of all, looking at the College of the Moon Bard, this is one that is rooted in the history of the Moonshae Isles specifically, which is a region in the Forgotten Realms, and kind of got like Fae influences and a bit of Druidic influence as well. The idea being with this bard that you're going to empower yourself with folk tales from the Moonshae Isles to give yourself different ways to utilize your bardic inspiration abilities that the bard has, and utilizing that as a resource in new and fun ways. And they actually said that this particular subclass was a bit of a love letter to folklore for them. So there's a few things. So first of all, as a magic action, at level 3, this is kind of like one of your core features. The Moonshae Folktales. You're going to be able to invoke the power of various folktales to give yourself different features with a bit of primal magic, which I really, really like the idea of a primal bard, which I think I've been quite public about saying. Because music to me seems like quite a primal thing rather than an arcane thing. So I'm glad they found a way to tap into that a little bit. So you get to choose one of the following folktales to give yourself certain benefits. So there's Tale of Life. So when you restore hit points to a creature with a spell, you can expend a bardic inspiration dice to increase the amount of points restored by a number equal to the roll, which you can do once per turn. You can use the Tale of Gloam to invoke a Tale of Mystery, so that when you use a bonus action, you can give a creature a Bardic Inspiration die, and then take the disengage... when you use a bonus action to give a creature Bardic Inspiration, you can take the disengage or hide action as part of that bonus action. So it allows you to slink off into the shadows. And then the Tale of Mirth, where you invoke a Tale of Merriment and Fey Guile. So when that you see an enemy within 60 feet of yourself succeed on a saving throw, you can take a reaction to expend a Bardic Inspiration die. The creature then has to roll that die to... Where's my page gone? Where's it gone? Blimey. To subtract the number rolled from the total of the save. Which hopefully will cause them to fail. You also get the Primal Lorist feature, which is going to grant you the Druidic language and the ability to gain an additional skill proficiency from animal handling, insight, medicine, nature, perception, or survival. And then you have the Blessing of the Moonwells, which is a pretty awesome ability, which is going to allow you to cast Moonbeam as a bonus action without expending a spell slot, which is obviously an iconic druid spell. Whilst you're concentrating on that, you also glow slightly, which is going to provide a little bit of light whilst you're concentrating on the spell. And whenever a creature fails its saving throw against the Moonbeam, another creature of your choice that you can see within 60 feet of you gains 2d4 hit points. So it's like a super Moonbeam. And then once you've used that feature, you can't use it again until you finish a long rest. So it's a one time a day thing, but it's pretty awesome. And then you get bolstered folktales. So when you use those folktales later on, you can roll 1d6 and use the number rolled in place of expending a bardic inspiration die. And when you use your Tale of Gloom, you can also teleport 30 feet to an unoccupied space that you can see as part of a bonus action. So that extra d6 is for the Tale of Life and Tale of Mirth options. So that is the College of the Moon Bard. Next, a quick rundown of the Knowledge domain, which is the Cleric subclass. This is the idea being that this is an update to the Knowledge domain subclass as it existed in the 2014 Player's Handbook. So this is not a brand new subclass, but rather an updated one. So just to give you a bit of a rundown here, I won't go into the full details. Again, you can download this for yourself, but this is the main updates. So one of the things they wanted to lean into with this was that the Cleric of the Mind wasn't just a smart cleric. It was a cleric that very much admired knowledge and put a lot of effort into increasing their knowledge, was kind of what they were going for. And so the Blessings of Knowledge feature now gives you proficiency with a type of artisan's tools. The knowledge domain spells have been updated to include more damage and combat relevant options, and the number of spells has also been increased on that list, so that the knowledge cleric is not necessarily so utilitarian, but actually have some combat based ones. It also has mind magic, which is a new feature that allows you to expend a use of a channel divinity to cast one of your domain spells without expending a spell slot, which, as we know in the 2024 rules, is a big deal because it means that you can potentially cast another spell that turn as well, a slotted spell, if you will, because you could only use one spell slot a turn. Yes, so allow for some interesting combinations potentially, provided you have the actions to do so. With Unfettered Mind, this is a new feature that's going to grant you telepathy and consistent intelligence checks, which is nice. And then Divine Foreknowledge, also a new feature that allows you to gain advantage on D20 tests for 1 hour, which is certainly quite the boon. And I believe that one comes in much later at... what level does that come in? Oh, blimey, my... This PDF viewer is not doing very well. Let me show the sidebar here so I can flick through a little bit better. Where's that gone? Why can't I see that? Oh, it's because we're on double pages. Okay. That's why I was getting confused. Yes, so Divine Foreknowledge here for 1 hour. That's coming in at level 17. Oh, I was glad I realised that we were on double pages this whole time. So, let's try that again, shall we? The Purple Knight Fighter here. Purple Dragon Knight, rather, to be more specific. Now, this is a pretty cool class that they have... subclass that they have massively overhauled. I think just to make it more appealing, because I don't know anybody that's played a Purple Dragon Knight before. Certainly not at one of my tables. So basically, the main feature here is that this. In fact, let me have a look at this box here and zoom in here for you. So the Nightly Envoy feature, which was formerly a Royal Envoy, has been moved to level 3. And lets you learn an additional language and cast Comprehend languages as a ritual, which is pretty cool. The idea being that the Purple Dragon Knight is kind of like the Jedi Knight going around doing diplomatic things, diplomacy, I guess, and so then having to be able to talk to and understand all different folk from around the Forgotten Realms. So knowing more languages, and indeed the Comprehend languages spell, being able to cast that as a ritual, is very cool indeed. But the big main feature of the Purple Dragon Knight is that you get a Purple Dragon Companion, which they have provided a stat block for in here. And essentially, as you level up and move through the various levels, your Purple Dragon will also level up with you. And yes, you read it right. You can become a dragon rider, which is going to allow you to mount the dragon and indeed heal it with your second wind. But of course, the riding here at this point is only at a limited capacity, and as you become more powerful, and indeed as does your dragon, those restrictions are going to be lifted, as you see, as part of the Amethyst Pinnacle, which is going to again improve your dragon companion. So there are going to be various points in this subclass where your dragon companion is going to move up the scale. Let's have a quick look at this this stat block, because I've not actually had a proper good look at it. So obviously it doesn't have a challenge rating here, because it really is dependent upon your ability here. So its hit points is going to be 4 plus 4 times your fighter level, and a number of hit dice equal to your fighter level. So again, as you level up, so too do the stats. And then it has telepathy, so you can communicate with it, kind of like I'm thinking very much Aragon, which I've been meaning to read again recently. And so it is amphibious, so it can go through air and water. You can add half of your proficiency bonus to any ability check or saving throw that the dragon makes, because you are bonded. Such, it has a basic rend attack, which again you'll see the bonuses and the damage rolls will increase based upon your own stats. So of course, as they go up, it too will get more powerful. And it has gravity breath, because it's based upon the Amethyst Dragon, which is going to be DC 8 plus proficiency bonus plus your intelligence modifier to save against. It's a Constitution save. And if not, the target is pulled either 15 feet toward or away from the dragon, and that will be your choice at that moment in time. So a nice little control aspect, but of course, if you want it to just simply attack, then you can do that. But the gravity breath is a 2 per day thing, so it doesn't seem overly powerful, which is nice. I was worried when they said about giving a dragon mount that it was going to be very powerful indeed. But actually looking at this, it doesn't seem to be too strong by any means. Strong enough to warrant wanting to do it, but not overly so. And of course, as I was saying, there are abilities that are going to allow you to ride the dragon in some sort of limited capacity. So then we have the Oath of the Noble Genies, which is basically an elemental-based paladin. Which is essentially is going to grant you an elemental smite. You're going to get to choose your type of genie when you invoke it, and that type of genie is going to have a different effect. So after you cast your Divine Smite, you expend a Channel Divinity to invoke this special effect, including the grapple condition, being applied to someone, a teleportation, a bit of extra fire damage if you want to channel an Efreeti, and a 10-foot emanation, which can push a foe 15 feet away from you and knock them prone with a wave of water. So you've got a bit of... now is the Deo Earth? I think the Deo's Earth, isn't it? I feel like it's Earth. I can't quite remember now. But yeah, these different elemental effects, anyway, as you lean into them. You've got fire, earth, wind, and water here. So the other thing is that they have then added genie spells to expand the spell list of the paladin, as you can see here, to provide a little bit more of elemental elements, lol, and otherworldly spells. And they've really tried to include a mix of combat spells and utility spells in there. An example they gave was the Contact Other Plane spell, which you get at level 17. There is the Aura of Elemental Shielding at level 7, which is essentially going to grant you resistance to elemental damage types. And then there is Elemental Rebuke, which is pretty damn cool. So basically when you are hit, you get to blast some elemental energy back at the foe, kind of a bit like Hellish Rebuke of Tieflings, but actually you get to choose the damage type of Acid, Cold, Fire, Lightning, or Thunder, and even if they manage to save, they're going to take half damage from that as well, so that's pretty cool. And then finally, the Noble Scion feature that you get at level 20 as a bonus action. You gain the benefits below for 10 minutes or until you end them. So you gain a fly speed of 60, and when you or your ally in your Aura of Protection fails a D20 test, you can take a reaction to make them succeed instead, which is pretty cool within that 10-minute window. So that's a pretty awesome idea. I like the idea of kind of like trying to tap into the wish powers of a genie. I like that a lot. So next we have the Winter Walker Ranger, which may very well have been my favourite subclass that they were talking about here. This idea of the ranger that roams around the frozen wastes near Icewind Dale. Very much the idea of being a haunt of the Arctic zones, as they referred to it. So very much leaning into the Icewind Dale lore for this one. So at level 3, you gain Hunter's Rime, which allows your Hunter's Mark to coat you rather, in ice, and give you temporary HP, whilst also slowing down the foe. So it can't take the disengage action. That was it as well. You also get Frigid Explorer, which gives you resistance to cold damage, and when you hit a creature with a weapon, you get to deal an extra 1d4 cold damage, which also ignores resistance to cold damage. And then when you reach level 11, that increases to an extra d6, which is nice. And you also gain some Winter Walker spells like Ice Knife, Pass Without Trace, Remove Curse, Ice Storm, and Cone of Cold at varying levels, as you can see. You also gain the Fortifying Soul, which basically is going to grant you advantage on saving throws, I believe is what they said. Advantage on saving throws, and against being frightened specifically, and again granting additional hit points on after a short rest here, based on, it looks like, your wisdom modifier, which is very cool. You get Chilling Retribution, which will basically allow you, if you're hit, to cause an attacker to be frightened of you, but also reduce the target's speed to 0. The idea being that you literally freeze them in fear, which is pretty cool. And then at level 15, you get Frozen Haunt. So when you cast Hunter's Mark, you take on this ghostly, snowy form, which lasts until the spell ends. And you gain the following benefits, which are immunity to cold damage, when you first adopt the form at the start of each of your subsequent turns, each creature of your choice in a 15-foot emanation originating from you takes 2d4 cold damage, which is also pretty nice. And you are partially corporeal, so you have immunity to being grappled, prone, and restrained conditions. And you can move through creatures and objects as if they were difficult terrain, but you take 1d10 force damage if you end your turn. And if the form ends while you're inside a creature or an object, you are shunted to the nearest unoccupied space. I kind of like the idea of trapping people in there myself, but I can understand why they don't include that in the game. So we've still got another 3 subclasses to go, so I'll try and go through these quickly. So you have the Scion of the Three, which is a rogue subclass which draws on the gods known as the Dead Three, which are Bane, the deity of tyranny, Baal, the deity of violence and murder, and Merkel, the deity of death. This is kind of a little bit assassin-y in many ways, but actually in some ways kind of cooler. This is the bloodthirsty rogue that is here to cause as much pain and suffering as possible. So at level 3, you gain Bloodthirst, which is going to give you extra damage to your sneak attacks. And if an enemy has taken a lot of damage in particularly. So they kind of described this as, whereas the assassin, you wanted to get in there first to do as much damage as possible, this version of the rogue is actually, I'm going to hang back until you've taken a fair bit of damage, and then I am going to unleash unholy pain upon you. So specifically, your sneak attack against a blooded creature is going to take even more damage. And once you, when you see a foe drop to 0 hit points, you can teleport 30 feet and then make an attack. So you are just empowered by people's suffering, which is pretty awesome. You then have Dread Allegiance, which is going to grant you resistance to a damage type, depending on which of the 3 gods of Bane, Baal, and Merkel you choose, and also grant you a cantrip based on that as well. Then at level 9, you have Strike Fear, which is a new Cunning Strike option, which is going to allow you to impose the Frightened condition. And then at level 13, you gain the Aura of Malevolence, again selecting one of the Dead 3, and basically creating this aura of damage based on your choice, which I think was also... I think it's linked to the choice that you make as part of your Dread Allegiance, and you change that up essentially at the start of the day, as I understand it. When you finish a long rest, you change your choice, as it says here in Dread Allegiance. So that's tied to that choice. And then finally, Dread Incarnate is kind of like your tentpole subclass feature, where you gain the Battle Tyrant feature, giving you advantage on attack rolls against anybody with the Frightened condition. And also, when you roll your sneak attack damage, you can treat any roll of a 1 or 2 as a 3. So you're at minimum doing 3 damage on any sneak attack dice, which is pretty intense. So next up we have the Spellfire Sorcerer, which is essentially leaning into this idea, as they have with so many, that as a sorcerer you are radiating raw magical potential. You are gaining your power directly from the Weave, which is the Forgotten Realms term for magic in the world, which is manifesting as this rare ability known as Spellfire. Now, I got the impression that this had come up in some of the Forgotten Realms books that I'm not particularly familiar with, but they were talking about Spellfire as if it's a known quantity. So this sorcerer is very much channeling that here. So you gain a few abilities, such as Spellfire Burst, first of all, allowing you to spend a sorcery point essentially to unleash fire at an enemy or grant health to an ally. Basically here. There you are, Bolstering Flames, which is going to give temporary hit points to ally, or deal fire or radiant damage to an enemy. You gain some new Spellfire spells. There's some decent ones here. Again, a lot of leaning into this fire and radiant energy kind of feel, which is nice. Cure Wounds coming in, available to you as well, which is pretty awesome. So basically, it's a mix of fire and protection. Then at level 6, you gain Absorb Spells, which you always have Counterspell prepared, and whenever a target fails a saving throw against Counterspell, you regain some sorcery points. So this idea of kind of siphoning off magical energy from those that you manage to stop from casting spells, which is pretty nice. At level 14, your Honed Spellfire feature improves that Spellfire burst that we were talking about a moment ago. And then at level 18, you gain the Crown of Spellfire, which is going to allow you to fly, avoid certain magical effects and spells, and also expend some hit dice to reduce some damage if you get hit by those, by burning some life force, essentially. So this is how it works here. So burning life force, once per turn, when you're hit by an attack roll, you can expend a number of hit dice up to a maximum equal to your charisma modifier to a minimum of 1. Roll the expended dice and reduce the amount of damage from that attack equal to the total rolled plus your sorcerer level. Which is an interesting feature. You're kind of kicking the can down the road, I suppose, to try and keep yourself alive now by tapping into your reserves before you otherwise naturally would. And then finally, the Blade Singer Wizard, which is basically an update from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything's Blade Singer. Here are the main updates here that they've provided. Blade Song now allowing you to use your intelligence modifier for attack and damage rolls whilst the song's active, and the number of uses now being tied to your intelligence modifier as well. Training in War and Song is going to grant you a proficiency in a skill chosen from a list of options, and also going to provide you with expanded weapon proficiencies, which have replaced armor training, and also, and I think this is a big one, allowing you to use a weapon as a spellcasting focus. I say that's a big one. I imagine there's probably an element in a lot of tables where tables are so used to wizards having their spellcasting focus, or clerics and such, that I imagine that it's often forgotten about the spellcasting focus needing to be out at the same time to cast spells. But of course, this removes that as either a problem or a technicality that people shouldn't have forgotten but had. It kind of takes that problem away either way. And then your Song of Victory now allows you to make a weapon attack as a bonus action after casting a spell as an action as well. So some pretty nice tweaks to the Blade Singer there, just for some quality of life improvements. So indeed, it has been, as I say, quite a big day for big week rather for D&D news with us here. But some nice, interesting things. I'm very intrigued by the Forgotten Realms Player's Guide, because they're also releasing a not just a Player's Guide, but a DM's Guide as well. So I'm intrigued as to how they are going to be different from one another. And I wonder if, I suspect if there's going to be a whole player's book, there's going to be a lot more players' options coming down the pipeline as well. So I'm very intrigued as to what those may very well be. But so interesting to see what else is coming. I hope you found this video helpful. If you haven't, don't forget, or if you have rather, if you have, do be sure to hit that thumbs up and subscribe to our YouTube channel here as well. All right. Next up then, folks, on Insight Check, it is time to answer some questions from you, our wonderful patrons and YouTube members. So let me get out my dice so that I can roll on this roll table and find out what questions you have for me. So question 10. This is a fairly timely question, actually, now that the Monster Manual is about to come out and we have the full core rules about to descend upon us. From Robert, any advice on converting a current 5e campaign into the new rules, or would you advise to finish and just create or convert characters for the new campaign? Thoughts? So, my general advice, and this is what I've been following my own rules on, if you will, in my own games, is I have been finishing up 2014 games because I don't want to take any character choices away from the players, and any character builds that may have been possible that are now no longer possible. I think it also prevents confusion on things of like, oh well, I could do that now last time, but I can't do that anymore, or things like that. So my general advice is stick with the 2014 rules until such time as there is a good moment. So one of my campaigns, for example, we moved into a brand new adventure. It was like a new chapter, and some people wanted to carry on with the characters that they had because it was higher level. Some didn't. And I said, well, do you want to stick with 2014 or do you want to update? And they said, well, let's update, because the story of the last adventure is very much over. Everything's been tied up in a neat bow. So let's just update. And so for those that weren't bringing new characters, we just converted those over. But that was kind of mid-campaign, but kind of not. Basically, for full disclosure, we just completed Shattered Obelisk, and then we were going to go on a short adventure and then tackle Vecna, Eve of Ruin. So the Shattered Obelisk hardcover book had been finished. That kind of whole story arc was over. This next adventure was really a separate thing, but following along on the adventures of some of the particular characters. So it didn't seem too cheap to convert some of those over. But for those adventures that I've been running that we're very much in the middle of, they have remained very much consistently 2014. And I think that just keeps things nice and simple, nice and clean, without really too much in the way of risk of anybody feeling like their character's been nerfed, or indeed anybody being upset that someone else's character is suddenly now much more powerful than it used to be. And it just prevents a lot of hard feelings. So that would be my general advice there. That's the same question again. All right. Okay, another question from Robert. This is an interesting one, which I might have to give some thought to here. So, how do you stop monsters or NPCs from being predictable, or just hit points, walking targets? Yeah, so this is a tricky one, and again, this seems very appropriate, given what I've been talking about in this particular episode of Insight Check with the new Monster Manual coming out. So there's a few things that you can do. One is to really lean into and study the stat block deeply. It's a really, really helpful thing to do, to really lean into it. And again, as I mentioned last week, the Monsters Know What They're Doing is a great tool. It's a huge book. It's about 400 pages. In fact, over 500 pages. It's huge. This will kind of lead you down the route of, okay, if this, then this. So if this monster has... so, for example, I think it's ghouls, for example. Ghouls have a history with elves that is implied in the stat block, but not really explicitly stated, although certain things... so basically, in the lore of the monster, it kind of goes into and touches on this history with elves and how they are immune to the paralysis effect. And so if you have studied the stat block well enough, you will know that a ghoul is probably not ever going to attack an elf for that reason. And things like that can be a huge game changer. But also look at, I think one thing that we forget quite often with D&D is that those 6 stats, those abilities, strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, charisma, can really tell us a lot about a monster. They can tell us so much. So take the time to study that and see what you can glean from it. But the best thing you can do is really study that stat block and really study the lore that comes along with the entry in the monster manual. That's the first thing, because sometimes creatures will, players or DMs will miss certain things that can really make a monster feel iconic. The other thing that I do, though, is don't be afraid to change things up. It's something that that I have struggled with, particularly now that I run public games, is in days of yore, back in the 2000s, before Reddit was a thing, before actual plays were a thing, it was very easy as a dungeon master to surprise your players. In fact, I remember the days where it was considered bad form for a player to have read the monster manual. It was considered really not good etiquette to sit and read the monster manual if you're a player. So that the DM could still surprise you. That attitude is now gone. If a player has sat on Reddit and if they've watched enough actual plays, they know the monster manual inside out. Sometimes even better, I have found, than the dungeon master themselves. So that becomes very, very difficult to surprise your players if you're running things directly out of the monster manual. Change things up. Because there is nothing in the rules of D&D that explicitly state that you have to run the monsters as they are depicted in the monster manual. So, give that goblin a flail, or a great axe even, and maybe change the stats up if you will, because, and they called this out recently on some of the marketing videos for the monster manual. The monsters that are depicted in the monster manual are not representative of every single goblin or orc or whatever that exists in the world of D&D. It is representative of a kind of general sense of where they should be. So tweak things, change the stats, change the weapons, change the armor. Like, I like the idea, say, of a goblin in plate armor swinging a flail about. That could be pretty fun, because goblins are unpredictable. They have all of those other abilities that they have, but they're not only are they quick, but they're also really hard to hit because of their armor, for example. They're not going to be very stealthy, so they're not going to be good in that, and they're not going to be ambusher goblins, but it can surprise the players. Equally, something like a troll. So many players, it really bugs me when a player automatically starts shooting fire spells off at a troll because they know that a troll's troll's regeneration is going to be stumped by fire damage. But what if it's an ice troll? Not an ice troll. A troll where ice is the one that's needed. Or perhaps a cursed troll. A zombie troll. Where they regenerate their health, but actually if they take radiant damage, that's going to stop the regeneration, and fire does nothing. Those sorts of things. I certainly think with like dragons. Dragons are a great one or boss monsters generally that have legendary actions. Change their legendary actions up. Change their lair actions up. Or even, and there was a great book, and I can't remember what it's called, and I want to get myself a copy of it. But there's a book on DM's Guild. I really can't remember what it's called. Damn. But it is basically a book on the DM's Guild where basically it provides lair actions for every single monster in the monster manual. That's one real way to surprise your players, where it's like, oh yeah, this isn't traditionally a boss monster, but you found him in his lair, and he's going to throw some extra shit at you. Those sorts of things are really, really good to surprise players with. Boss monsters particularly, change them up, customize to your heart's content, because otherwise you are going to find it quite tricky, because your players are going to come in knowing how that, particularly if a boss has been foreshadowed, for example. This happens a lot in my games, where you spend a long time foreshadowing enemy, and so your players are going to go off and they're going to study how to beat that monster. And players will optimize the fun out of a situation. That is an adage that I have heard over and over again, and definitely have evidence to back it up. That players will optimize the fun out of a situation because they're there to win. They're there to beat the monster, and they want the monster's treasure. So they're going to read up on the monsters. So change them up. And customize things. Or even, and this is not necessarily in the spirit of your question, but there are plenty of monster books out there. You don't have to use the goblin that's in the monster manual. Use the goblin that is in Tome of Beasts, or Forge of Foes, or Flea Mortals, or indeed, again, customize your own. But if you don't want to customize, and you do want to be a bit of a purist and use the monster manual stuff, I would highly recommend, once again, The Monsters Know What They're Doing, which is a hugely great book, and is really good for drawing out little flowcharts for yourself of like, this is the tactics that my monster is going to do. If any, well, I mean, all of you will have presumably watched Bardic Quest, but if you watch that first goblin encounter in the campaign, that really gave Saga and Johann a headache of a fight, where they just could not keep up with these goblins, that came from this. And goblins are, as an example, are a grossly underestimated monster. But they are quick, they are sneaky, they hide, and they are annoying, and they should be annoying. And that's going to make a goblin feel very different from a kobold, for example, because of the tactics that they use. Some of these things sometimes are really not obvious in the stat block, and this book by Keith Amman really does help. And it's been a little bit of a secret weapon of mine for some time. Awesome. Let's do one more question. Although, in the midst of talking about that, I put my dice away. So that was smart of me, wasn't it? All right. Simon Jelly. Thank you, Simon, for this question. Also feeling rather appropriate, given the fact that the 2024 rules are well and truly out, with the Monster Manual launching, at least for early access, in but a few days' time. So, Simon has said, now that the 2024 rules are well and truly out, and a lot of people, myself included, have them at the table, how do you incorporate this into a currently running campaign? Oh, this is interesting. This is pretty much the sort of question that Robert has asked. But he's kind of expanded upon that a little bit. Obviously, people want to use the new 2024 rules, but should we completely re-engineer character builds halfway through a campaign? I think not, but if you allow choice of new options going forward, it might lead to some OP combinations of old and new rules. It would be interesting to know your thoughts on this, and if you'll be integrating any 2024 ruling into Bardic Quest. So, 2024 rules won't be coming into Bardic Quest until Campaign 2. We are due to film the finale, hopefully, very soon, for Campaign 1. And then from there, Campaign 2 will then kick in with the 2024 rules to start with. As I mentioned earlier, I am of the belief of generally waiting until your campaign is over before you start bringing the new rules in. That being said, one thing that I am asking all of my tables is, do you want a pure 2024 D&D experience, or do you want a 2024 experience with a little bit of 2014 mixed in? Because the backwards compatibility stuff works. I know a lot of people have said that it's problematic, but it's really not. Because frankly, having run probably nearly 10 sessions now of 2024 rules, the game feels exactly the same. In terms of how it actually plays. Different character options are new, and certain mechanics are new, such as the heroic inspiration seems to be better. that it provides you a reroll, because I think a lot of people have been using it as a reroll for some time anyway. So they've kind of lent into that, which is good. The tools and the crafting rules are really good, really fun, and a nice way when you've got a little bit of downtime to go, hey, you've got a day. Do you want to do anything with it? Do you want to make anything? You've got your crafting tools, and you can really lean into that stuff quite nicely. But to be honest, the general vibe at the table is that it's exactly the same. It's just that the character options are different. And most of the character options that haven't been updated yet, they work. So I'm not too worried about that kind of mix and match and the super powerful combos. I even before the 2024 rules started coming out, I started to get really picky about what because I run so many games, what options I was going to allow at the table for any particular campaign. So I normally have said to people with some of my other campaigns pre-2024 Players Handbook, I basically said, right, obviously the core rule books are all valid, as are Xanathar's and Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, usually across all of my campaigns. But then I will start to get more specific after that. So I will say, right, so let me try this again. So I have a few different thresholds. So if it's a learning to play game, I'll literally say Player's Handbook, that's it. Because people that are coming on board don't want a huge plethora of options. They just want to learn how to play. So we're going to limit it to Player's Handbook only. Then if it's not a learn to play game, then I'll say Player's Handbook, Xanathar's and Tasha's is fine. And then I will also go a little bit more specific. So I will usually pick a book that is setting specific, and I will pick a book that is thematically specific. So, for example, running Tyranny of Dragons, if I was to run it again, because I didn't do this last time, if I was to run it again, I would say, right, you want your... Actually, I think I might have done with when we moved into Rise of Tiamat. I think I said this. So, Player's Handbook, Xanathar's and Tasha's, and then the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, because it's set in the Forgotten Realm, is my setting-specific book, and Fizban's Treasury of Dragons is my thematic book. So nothing from Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft would be valid. Nothing from Strixhaven, for example, would be valid. It would only be those books. It is a difficult thing to enforce, though, I have to admit, because you have to kind of have an encyclopedic knowledge to be able to go, no, that's not from, that is not from this book. But yeah, so that's something that I have started to do, and probably will continue to do going forward anyway, because I have found that if you... The crazy combos come from when everything is on the table, and I actually find a lot of the time that those combos are fun for the person doing them, and that's about it. Alright, so I'm going to do one more question, because that was kind of a double-up question. That's another question we've already done. Alright, so 6 from Jason Bradwell. Have you ever thought about starting a beginner's guide one-shot campaign for children or teenagers? My youngest has a D&D after-school club, but with a long waiting list. So thank you for this one, Jason. I know you play at my tables regularly. This is something I have given a little bit of thought to, not a lot though, because I have... I would love to do something if I was doing it in person, but it's not something I would have a desire to do online, only because I think there is a lot of worry with children's activities online, and I cannot control other people's behavior. Whilst as a DM, I can facilitate games and stuff. I can't control other people's behavior, and I wouldn't want to put myself or anybody else in a position where they feel like they would be held responsible if somebody else was bullying another child. And unfortunately, D&D and TTRPGs can the line between player conflict and character conflict is very thin, and it can bleed over quite easily. And because I don't have a strong enough teaching background with kids, because I have taught kids in the past, and because I don't have any formal teaching qualifications, I don't have any formal training when it comes to teaching kids, or indeed how to handle interpersonal situations between kids. I would worry that the events that may happen outside of the table, because also kids can just message one another, start bullying each other. Like, I don't want to be held responsible, to put it bluntly, for if that sort of thing occurs. I just sadly don't have the capacity and the bandwidth to run as many games as I am running, and also run Bardic Quest and the YouTube channel and put out the content, and also manage the interpersonal relationships of kids and teenagers. Not to be dismissive, because I really would like to teach more kids the game, but it's not something that I would be willing to do online, because it opens up too many tricky potential situations, which I suppose you could argue, how would that be any different in person? But I feel like in person, you can see the relationships with people as they walk into the room, all of that stuff. There's less kind of going on behind the scenes, if you will. And also, presumably, I would have a relationship with the parents, because they'd be dropping their kids off and stuff like that. Or it would be at a school or something like that, where there would be channels that I could utilize and lean into if there was any cause for concern that I could report to somebody. But just running games by myself online, it creates too many vulnerabilities on a number of levels, so it's not something that I would consider doing as kids groups, unfortunately, though it would be nice to be able to. But yes, I have given it a fair bit of thought, I'm afraid to say, but it's not something that is, unfortunately, on my to-do list. All right, lovely. So that's going to be it for the questions. So thank you for submitting those. They really are great to have. So if you wanted to submit any more questions, either in relation to just general Q&A, or indeed if you wanted to submit any questions for information on the upcoming campaign and the world and such, do submit those, and I will add them to the roll table to consider them in due course. But yes, finally, let's take a look now at some player tips. So I saw this show up on, I don't think it was Twitter, I think it was Threads or Blue Sky. It was posted by B. Dave Walters, who DM'd for the Stranger Things lot. He's been on a few other actual play shows as well that you may or may not be familiar with. I don't know who it was that put this together. He didn't know who put it together, but he shared it and said, whoever put it together, this is a great list of things. This is a player pre-game checklist that you can follow to go through to prepare yourself for a game. Because yes, I do think players should do some prep too. Maybe that's because I'm a grumpy DM that is grumpy that I'm the one doing all the prep, and the players don't have to. I don't know. But these are some useful things that you can do to get yourself into the zone before a game, and I wanted to share it with you because I thought it'd be really, really helpful. So first of all, Review your spells, your items, and your abilities. Have a look at what your character can do, what they're ready to do, and how they can tackle various situations, because it will really help you to avoid the analysis paralysis of a situation. And also, it will familiarize yourself with how your abilities work. And this is something that I think you should do before every single session. Go through your character sheet, have a look at what you can do, because something might jump out at you and you might go, damn, if only I'd known about that last session, I could have used that then. And the more you do it, the more familiar you're going to get with your character, and the less you're going to be caught off guard. But also, as this checklist suggests, have a look and see if there's anything that you're actually going to particularly look for an opportunity to use during this session, so that you can try something new and lean into all of the abilities that your character has. Next, review your background, your backstory in particular, but also your background features as well, of course, which you will have looked at a moment ago with the previous point. But also looking at your backstory and what you have written about your character. Just familiarize yourself with that. And ask yourself the question whether or not there is something in particular that you want to reveal about your character during this session, and if you want to find an opportunity to do so. Avoid, if you can, splurging your entire backstory out all at once, particularly if your character's joining the campaign this session. I've seen it many times where I'll introduce a character and I will say to the player, tell the rest of the group what your character looks like, or tell the rest of your group about your character. And they will say, yeah, he's an elf with blonde hair, and he grew up in this place. He is enemies with this person. He's wanted for this particular crime, and suddenly all of the mystery about the character is gone. So avoid doing that. Avoid giving everything away, but just pick a little bit of a tidbit of information. So let's say, for example, that your character is a noble and descended from nobility, and have been, from a very rich background, but they're out on the road. You might choose to reveal that yes, you had a childhood experience where you went to this very wealthy place. Just to drop the hint to the other players, that actually there's more to your character than meets the eye. Something like that, for example. Review your bonds, ideals, and flaws. Again, look at those, because those are key roleplay prompts for you. What is it that your character wants to protect? What are your character's core beliefs? And what is a big character flaw that your character has that often will get them into a spot of bother if they're not careful? And how can you lean into those? Because these will really help to elevate your character and bring some of those qualities out. Think about what your character wants to accomplish specifically during this next session. You're probably going to have, particularly if this is a long-running campaign, you're probably going to have some sort of idea as to what situation your characters are coming into for this particular session and what the goal is for the session. Now, it could be that your character wants to simply complete the quest, which is fine. But it could be that there's an aspect of this quest that does tie into your backstory, or perhaps your ideals, your bonds, and your flaws. So having looked at all of the other stuff that you've just looked at, think about what of those might feed into this upcoming quest, and therefore is there something in particular that you want to accomplish alongside the main quest objective, for example. And then finally, and this is a big one, clarify any rules or gameplay questions that you have. So if you're looking at any of your abilities and going, I'm not fully sure how that is going to work, you could do a really good thing, particularly with the new Player's Handbook, taking the Player's Handbook, going to the rules glossary, and taking a look at what the invisible condition means, for example. or how to jump across long distances. Just anything that you think might come up about your character where you're like, oh, I'm not fully sure how that should work. Read up on it. Find out how it should work. Because then it's going to really help. Your Dungeon Master is actually going to be very, very grateful if you do so, because it's going to allow them to focus on the story rather than having to look up rules or make rulings on the fly because they're not sure about things. For you to, I mean, sure, if the Dungeon Master equally says, no, that's not how it works in my campaign, like, definitely, like, sure, that is their prerogative as a Dungeon Master. But at least if you're coming in having an idea of what the rule should be and what the ruling should be, that's going to do so much to actually move the game forward and keep it moving at a nice pace. God, I do love this player's handbook. Look at that beauty. Anyway, so yeah, I just wanted to share that with you guys today because I think it's a really, really useful list of things that players can do before a session to really make that session run smoothly. So that is my player tip or player tips for this week. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in to this edition of Insight Check. This is proving to be... my intention was that it was only going to be like an hour every week, but we seem to be consistently going over that mark. So I am going to leave it there, but we've covered everything. I hope you found it useful. I hope you found it helpful and insightful for some of the things coming up for the Dungeons & Dragons game with both the Monster Manual and indeed the upcoming Forgotten Realms Player's Guide. I hope the questions that I answered were helpful. And yeah, give that checklist a go. Try and get into the habit of doing that before every single session and see how it changes your games. The more you do it, I think the more of a change you will see. So maybe try it over the next 3 or 4 sessions if you're a regular player. Just make that your kind of pre-game ritual in the half an hour before the game. Just kind of go over some of that stuff and just see how much it elevates your game. Because I'd be willing to put money on the fact that it may well elevate your game in ways that you hadn't expected. But that's it from me this week. Thank you, wonderful patrons and YouTube members, as always, for your continued support of this show. We really couldn't do it without you, particularly hitting the 1,000 subscriber mark this week. We are all collectively over the moon, so thank you for your support. Don't forget there will be an episode going into early access for you guys, the next episode of Bardic Quest, as the party dive deeper into the Shadowfell, entering the haunted swamplands as they try to liberate Johann's soul. But that is coming tonight, 7 o'clock. It's going to drop on Patreon for patrons, and hopefully, again, I can't schedule in the preview, the early access, unfortunately, for YouTube, so I have to try and get on there as close to 7 o'clock as I can, because I can only do it manually. I can't schedule it in automatically. But for those on Patreon, it will drop at bang on 7 p.m. UK time, and for YouTube, as soon as I can get on it and make that live for you guys as well, I will do so. But yes, so that episode coming later today. But that's it for Insight Check this week. Thank you for tuning in, and I will catch you next week.